Inside the small cabin, firelight flickered against two bodies bound tight on a worn rug. Caleb Morgan, a white man, widowed 10 years, who once swore his love belonged only to Clara, now trembled in the arms of Amara Johnson, the 20-year-old black woman who was his late wife's younger sister. The blizzard had passed, yet the storm within him raged fiercer still. Amara's lips brushed his like a question, and in a breath, every vow he had spoken lay shattered. Under the blanket's shadow, nothing remained but two hearts beating out of rhythm, a forbidden love neither could resist. In that cabin, the fire of a night reborn took hold, leaving a burning question behind. Was it true love, or a mistake he would never escape? Caleb Morgan sat alone in his log cabin, the oil lamp flickering across a face weathered by sun and wind. On the table lay a crumpled envelope, its edges stained with damp. He turned it in his hands, hesitating as if the thin paper held a hidden blade. For 10 years he had never read a letter from the Bennett family, his late wife's kin. Their words had been cold inquiries, or sharp reproaches. Why had he let Clara die in that snowstorm? Most had gone straight to the fire once he broke the seal, but this time, for reasons he could not name, he held back. The slanted hand of Margaret Bennett appeared. Amara has run away. She refused the match with Harold Pemberton. She said she wanted only to find the quiet place Clara once spoke of in her letters. If she comes to you, do not turn her away. She has nowhere else to go. Caleb froze. Amara Johnson. The name pulled him back through dusted memories. The girl with the deep brown eyes, standing silent in the church on his wedding day. Clara's gentle smile as she introduced her younger sister, and Amara's shy nod, her gaze averted. He had never thought that girl would return to his life. Harold Pemberton. The very name carried trouble. The Pembertons owned banks, land, and ties that reached into Denver. For a girl to run from a marriage with them meant she had chosen a dangerous road. He folded the letter, his grip crushing the paper. By instinct, he moved toward the fire, ready to throw it in like all the others. But the flames had died low, only embers glowing faint. He stopped, hand trembling. Instead of burning it, he slid the letter into a drawer, where Clara once kept her needles and thread. In the silence of the cabin, memory rose. Clara's pale blue dress still hung in the wardrobe. Her wooden comb still held a few strands of hair. Everything of hers he had left untouched, as if time itself had no permission to pass. And now a few wavering lines on paper had stirred it all awake. Caleb rose, pulling on his coat. Outside, the wind cut sharp, howling across the plains. He stared into the white expanse, and an image formed against his will. Amara, somewhere on the road, trying to outlast a Wyoming winter. The thought weighed heavy on his chest. He shook his head, telling himself it was no concern of his. But that night, he did not sleep. He lay on the cold bed, eyes fixed on the dark ceiling. The wind lashed the cabin walls, snow slid from the roof, a refrain without end. In the drift of half-dream, he heard footsteps across the snow. Morning found him moving through his chores as always, leading the horse, mending fences, gathering cattle. But when he passed the mound out back, where Clara rested, he lingered long. The grave lay buried deep in snow, the carved words fading. He bowed his head, whispering, "Clara, if Amara comes, what do I do? Send her away, or keep her here?" No answer came, only the wind tearing at his coat. By dusk, Caleb rode back from the far pasture, the last light swallowed by the plains. Leading his horse onto the porch, he stopped cold. The cabin, dark and waiting for 10 years, now shone with the faint glow of lamplight through the glass. His heart pounded, hand falling to the grip of his gun. He stepped inside, the door creaking open. Warmth spilled from the stove, carrying smoke and something else, faint and unfamiliar. At the table where Clara once wrote in her journal sat a slender figure cloaked in dark wool, black curls tumbling over her shoulders. She lifted her face, brown eyes locking onto his. "Amara." The word broke from his throat, hoarse. She nodded lightly, both hands resting on a worn leather book. Her voice shook from cold, yet carried resolve. "I'm sorry." The door was open. The lamp threw their shadows high against the wooden walls. Outside, the wind keened, but inside, another story had just begun. The oil lamp cast a warm yellow glow across the timber walls, picking out the cracks worn deep by years. Caleb Morgan stood still in the doorway, his shadow stretched long on the floor. At the table sat the young woman, her dark hands resting lightly on a cracked, leather-bound journal. It was Clara's diary, the one she had written in until the day she left him forever. Amara Johnson lifted her gaze. Her deep brown eyes met Caleb's gray-blue, eyes too well acquainted with grief. For a breath, the cabin seemed frozen in time. In the curve of her neck, the tilt of her head, the press of her lips, he saw Clara's shadow. Yet just as quickly, he knew the difference. Clara had been calm water, clear, still, gentle. Amara, in her eyes and even in her breathing, carried a fire that refused to be stilled. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice rough from the long, cold road. The door was open. This place, it felt familiar. Caleb stepped inside and shut the door behind him. The wind was cut away, leaving only the crackle of fire. He hung his wide-brimmed hat on the peg and pulled out a chair across from her. For a long while, neither spoke. Their eyes stayed locked, each searching for something words could not hold. At last, Amara turned the journal so it lay between them. The page lay open in Clara's steady hand. Wyoming is harsh, but within its harshness lies a peace found nowhere else. Whoever can endure it long enough will find their true home. Amara's eyes softened. She wrote that. And I want to find what she once found. Caleb's hands clenched on the table, veins taut. Part of him longed to send her away at once, shut the door, and let her return to where she belonged. Yet another part, stubborn and restless, could not turn from those eyes, the eyes of a woman who had left behind a city to chase something even he doubted still existed. He rose and moved to the hearth. "The snow's deep tonight. You can stay till morning. After that, we'll see." Amara nodded, drawing the worn cloak tighter. But her eyes did not waver. They were not the eyes of a beggar. They were the eyes of someone who had chosen her road. Morning light broke thin through snow on the roof. The cabin held its warmth from the fire burning all night. Caleb was up early, as always, set to the rhythm of ranch life, the sound of horses in the stalls, the wind along the fence line. But this morning another sound reached him. The clatter of pots, the hiss of boiling water, and a smell that burned sharp. He stepped into the kitchen. Amara stood over the old iron stove, hair unkempt, still wrapped in her cloak but tied with an apron. The sight stopped him. It was familiar, yet strange. Clara had once stood there too, stirring broth, seasoning with a steady hand. But Amara— "What's that smell?" Caleb muttered, his voice low and rough. Amara startled, nearly dropping the ladle. "I thought I'd make porridge," she said, a hint of defiance in her tone. "It seems I overdid it." Smoke rose thick from the pot. Caleb crossed the room, taking the ladle from her hand. Their fingers brushed, rough skin against soft, and a current ran sharp through his spine. Amara froze, her eyes lifting into his, close enough for breath to mingle. For a heartbeat, there was no wind, only the pounding of blood. He pulled away, setting the pot aside and lifting the lid. A charred mess clung to the bottom. From deep in his chest came something he had not felt in years, a dry, sudden laugh. Clara used to say this stove was a stubborn one, but she never burned a pot. Amara planted her hands on her hips, fire sparking in her eyes. "Then I'll learn. I'm not Clara. I'll do it my way." The words struck him. In her fierce stare he glimpsed Clara, but he also knew this was not the gentle woman he had buried. This was Amara. Stubborn, strong, unafraid to defy the world. Or him. Silence held for a few breaths. Caleb bent back to scrape the burnt porridge, his calloused hands steady, efficient. Amara leaned against the table, watching him work. Her gaze burned hot on his back, piercing through the walls he had built for a decade. When he turned, their eyes caught again. Amara didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She simply stood, unyielding. Caleb turned away, heat rising in his ears, a feeling he had forgotten long ago. Outside, the sun crept up over the snowy fields. Inside, the cabin quieted, broken only by the hiss of wood on the fire. Yet both Caleb and Amara knew something had taken root between them. Fragile, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. The first days on the ranch were a trial without end. Amara rose at the crow of the rooster, her eyes heavy from nights unaccustomed to such early hours. She stumbled after Caleb toward the stables, her cloak sweeping over the frozen ground. Every task was foreign. When she tried to start a fire, she sent ash drifting through the kitchen. When she carried a bucket of water, she slipped, flooding the floor. Even something as simple as hauling hay to the horses left a trail of straw scattered from the door to the trough. Caleb watched in silence, only moving behind her to set things right. But Amara did not quit. Each failure met her clenched jaw, straightened back, and a stubborn attempt to try again. Her hands, once meant for needlework and books, blistered red within 2 days. She said nothing, only wrapped them in cloth and kept working. Caleb observed from a distance. He had thought she would leave after the first morning, yet her defiance burned like a flame, troubling and yet drawing him closer. Clara had once adapted easily, slipping into ranch life as if born to it. Amara fought every step, faltered, but never turned back. One morning, Caleb led her into the cattle barn. The warm breath of the herd mingled with the smell of hay and milk. In the pale dawn light, the cows stood quiet, bells clinking soft. "You'll learn to milk today," Caleb said, voice low. Amara sat beside a cow, hands hovering over the empty pail. She stared at the swollen udder, uncertainty plain on her face. "I've never done this." "Try," he told her. Her fingers shook, fumbling against the hide. The cow flicked its tail, restless. No milk fell, only the scrape of the bucket. Sweat gathered on her brow, though the air was cold. Caleb crouched behind her, his shadow falling across her shoulders. Not like that. Use your whole hand, not just the fingers. He laid his rough palm over her small one, his hand enveloping hers. Warmth passed through the thin cloth, making her still. His breath brushed the curls that fell loose around her face. Like this, he murmured, closing her hand with his. Milk spurted in a thin stream, splashing the pail with a clear note. Amara's eyes widened. I did it. We did, he corrected softly. For a moment they sat close enough to breathe the same air. Her heart hammered, her cheeks flushed hot. When she lifted her gaze, his gray-blue eyes met hers, not cold as before, but carrying something deeper, more dangerous. Caleb pulled back abruptly and rose. Keep at it. You'll get used to it. She remained there, her hand still tingling from his touch. She bent again to the work, but her thoughts scattered. His nearness lingered, making her chest quicken with every drop that struck the pail. That afternoon, she fumbled with a loaf of bread, the knife slipping, nicking her finger. Caleb stopped short at the sight of blood. He stepped in, caught her hand, examined the cut. It's nothing, Amara said, trying to pull away. But he held it steady, wrapping it with cloth. Their eyes met again. Neither spoke, as though words would shatter the fragile air between them. He let go at last, his voice rough. Be careful. She watched him turn, her brown eyes glimmering with both defiance and something unsteady. That night by the fire, Amara drew out Clara's journal. Yet she did not read. She only stroked the worn cover, then closed it. Her gaze lingered on Caleb's back as he mended a bridle in silence. The man before her was no longer just an image from her sister's pages. He was living, breathing, closed off yet carrying cracks she had just begun to touch. Outside, the night froze hard. But inside the cabin, another warmth stirred, not born of the fire, but of small collisions through the day. A hand over a hand, an eye that lingered too long, a breath shared by chance. Winter was tightening its grip on the plains. The sky grew heavier, the wind cut sharper, and the cattle began to huddle in clusters against the cold. Caleb knew the signs well. He walked the fence line, mending brakes, checking the barn roof, fastening tarps against the wind. Amara followed close behind, her new boots slipping on the ice, though she fought to keep her footing. Caleb had told her she needn't come out, that the cabin would be warmer, but she had shaken her head. I won't sit idle. I need to do my share. Day by day, she threw herself into the work. Blistered hands and aching shoulders didn't stop her. She swept the yard, stacked firewood, cut old cloth for rags. When Caleb came back from the far range, he often found her near the stove, clumsy but unyielding. One evening, wind roared fierce, sweeping dry leaves into whirls outside the porch. Caleb pushed open the door, smoke and the smell of half-baked bread drifting in. He stopped short. Before the fire stood Amara, wearing Clara's faded apron. The worn fabric cinched her narrow waist, dusted with flour. The sight made his chest tighten. Past and present overlapped. Clara had once stood there, gentle hands stirring a pot. Now it was Amara, stubborn, strong, alive in a way that left him breathless. He stood still, gloved hand clenched tight. A war rose in him, the vow of loyalty to his dead wife and the pull he could no longer deny. Amara was unaware. She bent over the table, kneading dough. Stray curls slid across her face, damp with heat and sweat. She huffed, tossing her head, but the strands only fell again. Her flour-caked hands were useless. "Caleb," she said, her voice edged with frustration, "could you tie my hair back? My hands are filthy." He startled as though caught. "Me?" "Yes, unless you'd rather I cook with half my hair in the pot." He hesitated, then stepped slowly forward. Standing behind her, his heart beat out of rhythm. The scent of her hair rose, not Clara's lavender softness, but something else. Cheap soap, wood smoke, and something wholly Amara, earthy, vivid, alive. He gathered a handful of curls, his broad, clumsy fingers drawing them back. Her hair slid through his hand like silk. Caleb had never done this for Clara. She had always tended her own hair, while his hands were meant for bridles and rope, not for a woman's braid. Awkwardly, he twisted the cloth tie. Amara held still, her shoulders trembling faintly, her breath quick beneath his eyes. He leaned closer, knotting it firm. A strand slipped loose at her nape. Without thinking, he brushed it back. The moment lingered longer than it should. Amara's voice was soft, yet clear in the cabin's hush. "Thank you." Caleb stepped back, his hand still tingling with the memory of her hair. He cleared his throat, voice rough. "Best get back to it before it burns." Amara smiled faintly, a flash of light in the dark. Then she turned to the bowl of dough, leaving him standing there, his heart unsteady. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, another storm was gathering, not born of winter, but of the space shrinking between two souls. The snowstorm fell on the plains like a wall of white. Wind howled in waves, driving the cattle into a frenzy. Caleb pulled the reins tight, shouting above the roar, "Push them into the canyon, now!" Amara clung to her saddle, her face raw from the wind, her hair whipped loose. He had motioned more than once for her to turn back, but her dark eyes burned fierce against the winter night, unshaken. Her cry tore through the gale, "I won't leave you alone!" Together they charged on, their horses blurred in the storm. Caleb drove the lead steers, Amara circled wide, voice hoarse as she swung the rope to keep them bunched. In one glance he caught the recklessness in her. Nothing like Clara's gentle calm, but a fire fighting even the storm itself. When at last the herd was driven into the canyon's shelter, Caleb gasped, hands numbed to stone. He turned back and saw Amara staggering, her fingers purple in the cold. He shouted, "Back to the cabin!" They reached the house under a sky gone black, snow piling high across the porch. Amara slid from her horse, her knees giving way. Caleb lunged, catching her in his arms. Her body was light, but cold as carved ice. He carried her across the threshold, kicking the door shut behind him. The cabin lay dark but for the last red coals. Caleb threw wood on the fire, the blaze leaping up to reveal Amara's pale face. He laid her down on the thick rug before the hearth. Her dress clung wet and heavy, her body shivering hard. Caleb knelt, his hands trembling, torn inside. "Amara, give me leave. If I don't, you'll freeze her lips." Blue with cold, stirred weakly, a whisper escaped. "I trust you." The words struck him deep. He bent, peeling away her soaked outer layer, each motion cautious as though he feared himself. The wet cloth slipped from her shoulders, baring skin gone bloodless with frost. Quickly, he wrapped her in heavy blankets, not daring to let his eyes linger. She trembled, breath broken. "Don't go far. Please." He drew a long breath. His own clothes were soaked through, his body numbed. He stripped off the heavy coat, then the sodden shirt beneath, garments dropping heavy to the floor. In only the thin layer left, he slid beneath the blanket, pulling it over them both. Heat spread from his chest into her back, steadying her shivers. Yet the closeness pressed on him harder than the storm outside. His chest against her spine, his breath stirring her curls. He closed his eyes, fighting for calm. But her scent slipped in, not Clara's lavender softness, but something else, sharp with soap, smoke, and a warmth that was wholly Amara. His hand tightened on her shoulder, shaking faintly. Memory rose. Clara's last winter, her gentle eyes as they dimmed. He had sworn never to love again. And yet here he was, holding another woman, his late wife's sister, and his heart thundered like a boy's. Amara turned toward him, her brown eyes wide, catching firelight, her breath fanned hot across his cheek. "I feel safe with you." Caleb went rigid. He longed to halt it, to build distance, but his throat closed. All he could do was look at her, too near, too real. She leaned closer, arms sliding around him. Their breaths mingled, hot against the cold. Her small hand clutched at his back as if to life itself. Caleb felt the defenses of 10 long years break apart. The moment stretched taut, ready to snap. He buried his face in her hair, the scent of smoke and skin rising around him. His voice broke rough. "You'll be all right." "I'm here," Amara's eyes closed, her lips curving in a weary smile. "Don't let me go." Caleb drew the blanket tighter, holding their warmth fast. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, another storm, silent, fierce, rose in both their chests, impossible to still. After the storm, the prairie lay drowned in silence. Snow stretched so thick and white it seemed the world itself had stopped breathing. Inside the cabin, firelight leapt against the wooden walls, shadows of 2 figures wavering with each crack of the logs. Caleb sat on the bench, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the floor. He had never felt so weak. Since last night, since he and Amara had lain beneath the same blanket, their breath mingling. His heart had not found its old rhythm. He knew he stood too close to the edge. Amara stood at the hearth, folding the heavy quilt. Her hair hung damp in loose curls across her shoulders. She looked at him, quiet, but resolute. In just a handful of days, through storm and trial, she had stepped into the hollow Clara left behind. And now he was retreating, like a coward. When Amara crossed the room, Caleb's chest tightened. She stood before him, plain and unafraid. "You're avoiding me," she said, her voice low but clear. He didn't lift his head. "I'm not. You are. You won't meet my eyes. Every time I come near, you turn away." She bent close, her dark gaze locking on the gray he tried to hide. "Is it because of Clara?" Her name fell into the cabin like a blade to the heart. Caleb flinched, then bowed his head slowly. "I am guilty. Guilty to Clara, to you, to myself. I swore I would love only her." To the end, Amara shook her head, firelight sparking in her eyes. "She loved you with all she had. But she's gone. You keep the vow, but bury yourself alive in the keeping. If Clara could see you, she would never want this. Caleb said nothing, breath heavy in the silence. Amara laid her trembling fingers over his, warmth pressing into his rough hand. Let me care for you. Not as her, not in her place. As me, Amara, loving you in my own way. He lifted his eyes, meeting hers. There was no pity there, no shadow of comparison, only a stubborn, open love, burning like fire against the snow. He could resist no longer. Amara leaned in. Her lips brushed his. A question. Light as a feather. Caleb shuddered. And then all that he had held back for 10 long years broke loose. His arms crushed her to him, answering the kiss with hunger long buried. That first kiss was trembling, yet fierce. The taste of smoke, the thaw of snow, the living scent of her hair blended into something that drowned the past. Amara gasped, her hands sliding under his shirt, nails pressing into scarred skin. Caleb whispered between ragged breaths, I'd forgotten this. I thought I'd never feel it again. Then remember, she answered, her lips brushing his ear. Let me be the one to bring it back. They fell together onto the rug before the fire, their faces washed in red glow, their shadows tangled high upon the walls. Caleb brushed curls from her brow, his hands clumsy, trembling. He searched her eyes, desperate to know this was real. I'm afraid, he breathed. I'm not, she whispered back, her breath on his. Don't think. Just feel. Their kiss deepened, shaky at first, then burning hotter. Amara clutched at his shoulders, holding fast. Caleb's rough hand slid down her back, pausing at her waist, drawing her close against him. His heartbeat hammered, wild in his chest. Her breath came quick, their warmth banishing the last cold from their skin. Each touch, each grasp, wiped away the gray years of loneliness. Caleb pulled the blanket over them, shutting out the light, shutting out the past. In that small, dark world, there was nothing but each other, mismatched heartbeats, gasping breaths, whispers that sounded like confessions. He murmured her name, breaking like prayer. Amara pressed her mouth to his again, deeper, fiercer, vowing in silence she would not let him return to the shadows. That night, Caleb let go of the vow that had chained him to grief, and Amara, held in the fire of his arms, found the first true shelter for her heart. The fire on the hearth flickered, but the blaze of their love burned brighter, making them alive again, whole and wanting. When the flames fell to embers, they lay wrapped together still. Amara pressed her cheek against his chest, listening to the steady thrum of his heart. Caleb held her tight, as though letting go would make it vanish. His voice rasped, You saved me from myself. Amara smiled, her eyes drifting shut. No, I only reminded you your heart still knows how to love. Outside, snow fell heavier, smothering the prairie in silence. But inside the cabin, a new fire had been lit, the fire of desire, of love, and of rebirth. Dawn came quietly. After the storm, the prairie lay white as a new sheet of cloth, smooth enough to seem unreal. Inside the cabin, the warmth of the fire still lingered, and Amara slept under the blanket, her breath even, her face at peace after the long night. Caleb rose first. He pulled on his shirt, walked to the table, and poured himself a cup of strong black coffee. The bitter taste bit his tongue, but it could not wash away the weight pressing on his chest. On the hearth sat the old photograph of Clara, his late wife with her soft brown eyes and her smile gentle as spring wind. Caleb stared, his heart constricting. Last night he had let himself be swept away, by warmth, by desire, by the presence of another woman. And that woman was Clara's sister. His fingers shook as they touched the worn wood of the frame. A whisper escaped, rough and broken. "I betrayed you, Clara." For a moment he thought he saw her, sitting in this kitchen, tilting her head, looking at him with sorrow and reproach. The vision crushed his breath, bent him low over the table, his hands gripping the cup tight. He knew Amara was not at fault. She had only offered her love, honest and proud. But he had yielded, letting desire take the lead. 10 years he had kept faith, only to see his vow undone in a single night. Amara stirred, then sat up. The blanket slid from her shoulders, showing her tangled curls and bare skin touched by morning light. She looked around, searching for him. And then she saw his back, heavy at the table, his hand trembling around the cup. The flame that had sparked in her heart last night, the sense of being accepted, being loved, cooled fast. She rose, wrapping the blanket around her, and walked softly toward him. "You're up early," she murmured, voice still husky with sleep. Caleb only nodded, not turning. He dared not face those brown eyes, afraid of the questions he could not answer. Amara sat beside him, her hand brushing his arm. "Caleb, about last night." "Don't!" He cut her off, his voice raw. He set the cup down, head bowed. "Last night was a mistake." Her heart clenched. She drew her hand back, the cold seeping through her skin. Mistake. The word echoed like a blade. "I swore to Clara," Caleb whispered. "I promised no one would take her place. But I gave in, let weakness rule me. I'm not worthy of your trust." Amara bit hard on her lip to keep from breaking. She lifted her head, her eyes blazing. "So everything I gave you was only Clara's shadow?" Caleb stayed silent. He longed to say no, to deny it, to pull her close and beg forgiveness. But the vow at the graveside, the years of memory, bound him tight. No words came. Silence thickened. Slowly, Amara stood, pulling the blanket tighter around her. "I thought you saw me. Not Clara, not the past. Me, Amara. But perhaps I was wrong." Her eyes shone. Tears held back. She turned away, stepping into the bedroom. The door closed with a dry, final creak. Caleb sat unmoving, his hands covering his face. Inside him warred the sacred memory of Clara and the fierce new flame of Amara. He felt like a traitor to both. Outside, the morning wind swept over the endless white. Inside, the silence stretched heavy enough to hear the pounding of each heart. Last night, they had given each other everything. But by morning, an unseen wall stood between them, built from the ghost of the past and the weight of his doubt. The air inside the cabin lay heavy as a wet blanket, pressing down on every breath. Since that bitter morning, Caleb had grown quieter still. He busied himself with harness straps and firewood, giving Amara only a few curt words. "I'm going into town. I'll be back before nightfall." Amara nodded, though sorrow flickered in her eyes. She wanted to speak, to ask him to stay, but her lips pressed tight instead. Caleb pulled on his coat, set his hat, and stepped out. His figure vanished into the snow, leaving the cabin in silence. Amara lingered at the hearth, staring at Clara's photograph. The question gnawed at her. Would she always be only a shadow? The pain curled inside her, but so too a quiet resolve. Whether Caleb saw it or not, she would prove she belonged here. By late afternoon, dim light fell across the prairie. Amara was stacking wood near the stove when hoofbeats sounded outside. Her heart leapt. Caleb, back early? But no. Through the fogged window, she saw two strangers ride into the yard. One tall and lean, shoulders draped in a dark hide coat, a smirk carved deep into his mouth. The other, shorter, bearded, with eyes glinting like a hungry animal's. Before she could move, a knock rattled the door. "Anyone home?" the tall one called, his voice stretched with false sweetness. Amara held her breath, silent. "We just need water for the horses, miss," the bearded one added, his tone sly. A fist slammed the wood, hinges groaning. Amara stumbled back, heart pounding. Caleb's words echoed in her mind. "If there's trouble, the Winchester's on the shelf." She turned, her trembling hand finding the rifle's cold steel. She had never fired a gun, yet now it was the only thing between her and ruin. The door burst open. They stepped inside, stinking of sweat and whiskey. The tall one squinted, feigning a bow. "Well, well. Prettier than we thought." His gaze swept her body, bile rising in her throat. The bearded one laughed, tipping his hat. "Where's your man, sweetheart? Or are you all alone here?" Amara drew a breath, raising the Winchester. Her voice shook, but steel rang through it. "Back away. I'll shoot." They froze, then burst into laughter. "Girl, you know how to use that thing? Or you aiming to scare us with those shaking hands?" Her teeth clenched. She steadied her grip, recalling Caleb's sure stance. She cocked the lever, click, the sound sharp in the room. The tall man sneered, but his steps slowed. "You could fire, but your chances of walking away ain't much." Amara leveled the barrel, her pulse hammering. Cold sweat trickled down her temple. The man lunged, reaching for the gun's muzzle, when hoofbeats thundered outside. The door swung wide. Caleb filled the frame, his Colt drawn, eyes hard as iron. "Drop it," he said, voice flat, deadly. Both men stiffened. The bearded one whipped a knife from his belt, but before he moved, a shot cracked. The bullet struck the oompson, floor at his boots, chips of wood flying. "Next one," Caleb growled, "goes through your skull." The tall one raised his hands. "We just wanted water. Get out, before I bury you in the snow." The fire in Caleb's eyes drove them back. They stumbled into the yard, spurred their horses, and were gone in a spray of snow. Silence returned. Amara sagged, the Winchester heavy as stone in her hands, draining every ounce of strength. She dropped into a chair, trembling. Caleb stepped close, his gaze steady on hers. "You held them square." "But I didn't fire," she whispered. "You didn't have to," he answered low. "They saw it in your eyes, that you would." Her dark eyes lifted, glimmering. "I was terrified." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Caleb said, his hand resting on her shoulder. "It's standing your ground anyway." In that moment, the wall between them cracked. Caleb saw her clearly, not as Clara's ghost, nor as a fragile shadow, but as herself, fierce, trembling, and brave. The firelight danced over their joined hands, and for the first time, Caleb knew. Amara was no longer a stranger in his home. She was becoming part of his life, impossible to deny. The cabin door shut, cutting off the bitter wind. Inside lingered the smell of gunpowder, melting snow, and ragged breath. Amara sank into a chair, her hands still trembling, her eyes haunted by what had just passed. Caleb set his revolver back on the rack and turned. He saw her small shoulders shaking, her hands clutched at her skirt. Regret, fear, and tenderness rose in him at once, and he crossed the room in quick strides. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms. His embrace was tight, as if he could crush away the fear still clinging to her. Amara pressed her face to his chest, hearing the strong, uneven beat of his heart, the sound of his unrest. "You did well," he whispered. "If I'd been any later," she flinched, stopping his words. "But you weren't. You came in time." They held each other in silence. Slowly, warmth shifted into something else. Amara lifted her face. Her dark eyes still glistened with tears, but in them burned a fierce light. Caleb looked down, caught in that gaze, and all his defenses fell. He bent, pressing his lips to hers. No tremor this time. The kiss was deliberate, burning. Amara answered at once, her arms tight around his neck, pulling him closer. The kiss stretched long and deep, pouring out all that had been left unsaid. Their breaths tangled, quick and uneven. Caleb's hand cupped her face, then slid down her shoulder, pausing at her waist. His touch quivered, but he did not pull back. Amara leaned into him, her whole body against his chest, yielding to his rough fingers tracing lightly. A sigh escaped her, husky, half longing, half surrender. Caleb held her tighter, as though she might vanish if he let go. For that moment, nothing else existed. The blanket on the floor, the fire's glow, the pounding of two hearts. He kissed her throat, their fingers laced tight. Amara whispered his name, soft as prayer. Then suddenly, Caleb froze. His breath stilled, his shoulders went rigid. Clara's image rose before him, her kind eyes, her pure smile, standing like a ghost between them. He tore back, his hand falling away, eyes wide with panic. "No, I can't." Amara stared, lips still warm from the kiss. "Why?" He turned, covering his face with his hand. "I swore to Clara. Last night, and now again. I've betrayed her. I can't keep on," his words cut like a knife. Amara's chest ached sharp. She stepped back, her voice shaking but hard. "So no matter who I am, I'll always stand in her shadow." Caleb stayed silent. No denial, no plea. Tears spilled hot down Amara's cheeks. "I thought you saw me. But you only see the past." The silence in the cabin thickened, crushing. Outside, the wind whistled through the cracks. Inside, two hearts beat wild, divided by the memory of the dead. Amara wrapped the blanket tight, retreating toward the bedroom. The door closed with a dry, final creak. Caleb stood in the empty room, fists clenched, eyes hollow. The kiss still burned on his lips, but inside lay a pit of guilt. The fire snapped and glowed, but the two within the cabin had lost each other, trapped between memory and the present. A gray morning settled over the plains. The snow had stopped, yet the air hung heavy, as if nature itself carried a silence too deep to break. Inside the cabin, Amara sat at the wooden table. The oil lamp flickered over a blank sheet. Her hand trembled around the pen, but her eyes stayed steady. "Caleb," she wrote, "I tried. I believed love could open your heart. But I see now, you still belong to Clara, and I remain her shadow. I cannot live another day in that darkness. Thank you for sheltering me when I had nowhere else to go. I will carry the memory of you as part of myself, but now I must walk my own road. Do not follow me. The train leaves Cheyenne at noon. Her script grew smaller, blurred when a tear fell across the page. She set the pen down, folded the letter, and laid it beside Clara's photograph, a farewell to both women who had loved the same man. She rose, lifting her small suitcase. At the door, her dark eyes lingered on the kitchen one last time. The faded apron on the peg, the burn mark on the table from her clumsy cooking, traces of days she had tried to make this place a home. She pressed her lips tight, then closed the door softly behind her. Caleb returned from the barn, boots crusted with snow. He stepped inside, hanging his coat as always. But today something struck him at once. The emptiness. The fire lay cold, ash gray. No smell of scorched bread, no clatter of pots. The cabin sat still, strange as a stranger's house. On the table lay the folded note. His heart thundered as he opened it. Amara's words cut like hammer blows. By the end, his hands shook so hard, the paper slipped away. He dropped into a chair, his head in his hands. Empty. The cabin felt as it had for 10 years. Only him, only Clara's ghost in the frame. But this time the solitude was heavier, for he had just lost something alive, warm, and perhaps his last chance. He stepped into the kitchen, touched the apron Amara had worn. Her tousled hair, flour-stained hands, stubborn laughter at a ruined pot. All rushed back, stabbing him sharp. His eyes fell on Clara's portrait. In that moment her gaze held no reproach, only sorrow. And in his mind, her voice rose. Don't let my ghost take her from you. The words struck him like lightning. If he did nothing, Amara would be gone forever. There would be no second chance. He sprang to his feet, pulling on his heavy coat. The horse stood ready in the barn. Caleb strode to the porch, the morning wind cutting his face, cold and fierce. But inside him burned only one thought: reach Cheyenne before the train left. He gripped the reins hard and swung into the saddle. The horse screamed and leapt, hooves pounding the frozen earth. Across the wide plains, the rhythm of hooves echoed like a war drum. Caleb bent low, wind whipping his face, his eyes unblinking. For the first time in 10 years, he knew what he wanted. Not the ghost of the past, but a living woman waiting, if hope had not yet fled. Behind him, the oil lamp flickered faintly, casting yellow light over the letter left open. The reply to those words was not in ink, but in the resolve of a man finally awakened. And out on the snowbound land, his horse thundered toward Cheyenne. The horse thundered across the frozen earth, hooves pounding like war drums. Wind slashed Caleb's face, his breath bursting into white clouds that vanished in the blizzard. His stallion kicked up. 10 miles of ice and snow. He knew 1 minute late, the train would leave, and Amara would vanish from his life. The thought drove him harder. He leaned low, reins tight, urging the animal faster, reckless against the slick ground and biting cold. Flashes of her haunted him. Amara fumbling in the kitchen, her wild curls tumbling when she laughed, the fire in her eyes when she lifted the Winchester, and that kiss, half given, half stolen, burning and unfinished. Each memory lashed him forward like a whip. Through the mist, Cheyenne Station appeared. Smoke billowed from the waiting engine. The long whistle shrieked, slicing the sky like a call of farewell. Dozens of passengers crowded the platform, dragging trunks, calling to one another in the chaos. Amara stood among them, her dark cloak drawn tight. The small valise by her side looked heavier than any trunk, weighted with choice. Her eyes followed the train as it hissed, ready to roll. Each heartbeat dragged her closer to that destiny. She had written her goodbye. She had sworn this was right. But why did her feet feel carved from stone, unable to lift? One step forward meant no return. One step back meant surrendering to a man bound in ghosts. Hoofbeats shattered the clamor. Heads turned. Out of the blowing snow, Caleb appeared, cloak snapping, eyes fierce as steel. His horse lunged onto the platform, skidding to a halt in a storm of breath and steam. Amara's heart slammed so hard it stole her breath. Caleb leapt down, boots striking the planks. He pushed through the crowd, straight toward her. Stopping just short, he thrust out his calloused hand, trembling yet firm. "Amara," his voice rasped, loud enough to drown the whistle. "Come home with me." She froze, torn between the open hand and the smoking engine. The world split in two. The safe path of leaving, or the man before her, torn by ghosts yet burning with life. "Caleb," her voice shook. "And Clara? What of your vow?" Pain flickered in his gray eyes, then gave way to fire. "I kept it 10 years, but a vow cannot bring her back. It only buried me alive, and now it's burying you." He stepped closer, hand still out. "I don't want to lose you. I don't want another morning in an empty kitchen knowing I let you go, Amara. You are the breath, the life I need." The whistle screamed again. The conductor bellowed, "All aboard!" Train departing. Amara gasped, tears spilling hot. She turned from the grinding wheels back to him. For the first time, she saw herself in his gaze. Not Clara's shadow, but Amara, flesh and soul. Her heart cried out. Her hand lifted, trembling, and fell into his rough palm. Caleb closed his grip, pulling her into his arms. Behind them, the train shrieked and rolled, iron wheels, screaming against the rails. But the world held only the two of them, clinging in the storm of smoke and snow. Some passengers smiled, others shook their heads. It didn't matter. For Caleb and Amara, time had stopped. He bent close, whispering in her ear, "Thank you for choosing me." She closed her eyes, tears blending with a trembling smile. "I chose myself, and myself is choosing you." Behind them, the train left the station, carrying others toward distant lands. But on the platform of Cheyenne, two figures stood locked together, facing the white horizon where the wind howled, and where a new beginning had just been chosen. On a hillside at the end of the valley, where the wind never ceased, and winter's snow melted slower than anywhere else, a small plot of ground lay within a rough wooden fence. There a modest headstone rested in silence. Clara Morgan, 1864 to 1877. Caleb led Amara up the damp slope, his hand clasping hers. The sky was pale gray, clouds drifting slow as if unwilling to disturb the quiet. At the grave, Caleb released her hand and stood tall, eyes fixed on the letters weathered by rain and wind. He knelt, his rough fingers pressed against the cold stone. "Clara," his voice rasped, breaking like the wind. "I kept my vow to you for 10 long years. I lived with your memory, kept the house just as you left it. But time, it has not given you back to me. It has only taken more. He stopped, drawing a deep breath. Beside him, Amara knelt too, laying down a small bundle of wildflowers gathered from the roadside. The purple petals trembled in the wind, fragile yet stubborn. Amara spoke softly. "Sister Clara, I cannot replace you. I do not wish to. But I love him. I love him with all that I am. And if you allow it, I ask to stay by his side, to care for him as once I cared for you." Caleb turned to her, his eyes glinting with a mix of pain and gratitude. Then he faced the grave again. "I ask you, let me live on. Let me love again. Not to forget you, but so the part of me that remains will not wither in loneliness." The wind stirred, carrying off a few dried petals. In that moment, both felt as though Clara was listening, smiling from some distant place. The next day, they held a small wedding, plain like the land itself. No fine gown, no crowded church, only an old preacher passing through town, a crown of wildflowers in Amara's hair, and vows whispered beneath the cabin's porch. Caleb wore his best coat, Amara a simple beige dress. They stood in the light of afternoon, golden beams falling across the worn wooden floor. The preacher asked, voice steady though quiet, "Caleb Morgan, do you promise to take her hand, to walk through winter and summer, in joy and in sorrow, in health and in sickness?" His gray eyes locked on Amara, rough with emotion. "I do." "And you, Amara Johnson, do you promise to stand with him all your days, not as your sister's shadow, but as yourself, the woman he has chosen?" Her dark eyes shone, a tear slipping free, though her smile held steady. "I do." Their hands tightened, fingers entwining like two streams at last converging. Outside, the wind still blew, but within the cabin, a new chapter began. That night, Caleb sat on the porch, Amara leaning against his shoulder. Darkness blanketed the meadow below, while stars glimmered bright above. He turned to her, whispering, "I never thought I'd see this day." She gripped his hand tighter, answering softly, "We've lost too much not to cherish it now. So let's hold it fast." Caleb nodded, eyes lifting back to the heavens. For the first time in 10 years, he no longer saw Clara's ghost in the stars. He saw only the present, saw Amara, warm and alive beside him. A new promise had been carved, not in stone but in their hearts. Winter drifted slowly away, leaving streaks of melting ice along the hillside. When the spring winds returned, the prairie opened in fresh green. Caleb's ranch seemed changed, not only because the herd grew stronger, but because laughter now filled the air each day. Amara rose early, often before the sun broke. She stoked the kitchen fire, letting the smell of coffee spread through the cabin, then wrapped her scarf and went to the henhouse. Caleb followed with a wooden pail, watching her move with quiet steadiness. The hands once clumsy enough to burn a pot of soup now knew how to milk a cow, how to tend a newborn calf. Every step she took was slow but sure, as though she were carving her name into the land itself. Caleb often stood apart, silent. He realized a simple truth. This house, once a tomb for memory, had become a real home, not because of timber or roof, but because of the living breath of the woman who walked within it. One noon, after driving the herd back, Caleb entered the kitchen. Amara was bent over the table, hair tumbling loose, humming an old work song. He leaned against the doorframe, his chest softening. She looked up, caught his gaze, and flushed. "If you keep staring like that, who'll tend your cattle?" Caleb stepped closer. rare smile tugging at his mouth. The cattle can wait. You cannot. Her laughter lit the room, and in that moment, they were no longer bound by shadows of the past. They were simply husband and wife, sharing warmth and shaping life together. Each evening they sat on the porch, watching the sun paint the fields gold. Amara leaned against his shoulder, his hand covering hers. Often no words were spoken, and the silence was no longer heavy. It was peace, a language only they shared. Once Amara whispered, "I used to think happiness was only a dream. But here in your arms, I know I've found home." Caleb tightened his hold. "So have I. After all these years, I've learned a home is not timber or stone. It's the one sitting beside you." Word of their marriage spread down to Cheyenne. At first came glances, whispers, some who measured Amara against Clara. But time gave its answer. Folks saw Amara's steady work, saw Caleb's change, from a cold man into one who smiled, spoke, and shared. Prejudice faded. In its place came respect. Gifts began arriving. A basket of apples, a skein of wool. Children ran across the yard, calling her auntie. And one day, Caleb realized their cabin had opened not just to them, but to a community. On a late spring night, while the wind still carried chill, Amara lit the oil lamp. They shared warm bread at the wooden table. On the wall, Clara's picture remained, no longer a ghost, but a memory kept with honor. Caleb raised his cup, eyes fixed on Amara's. "I thought my life had ended, but you've taught me to live again. You are my true home." Her smile trembled with quiet joy. She reached across, clasping his hand. "And you are the road I chose, not to flee, but to return." The oil lamp flickered, casting its glow over their faces. Outside, the wind still swept across the prairie. Inside, a home had been found, no longer haunted, no longer borrowed, but real. As the seasons turned, the rhythm of their life grew steady. Spring brought calves to the pasture, summer baked the hills in gold, and autumn filled their cellar with jars of preserves Amara had learned to make with stubborn patience. Caleb often caught himself pausing in the midst of work, struck by the sight of her bending over the garden rows, her laughter carried on the wind, her voice scolding chickens as though they were children. One evening after a long day, he found her sitting on the porch, mending his shirt by lamplight. The needle flashed in and out, steady despite her tired hands. He sat beside her, leaning against the post. For a long while neither spoke, until Caleb said quietly, "I never thought I'd see this again. Someone waiting for me at the end of a day." Amara set the needle aside, slipping her hand into his. "You are not meant to walk through this life alone, Caleb. None of us are." Winter returned, softer this time. Snow lay deep across the ranch, but the cabin was warm with more than firewood. Friends from Cheyenne came often, bringing news, laughter, and sometimes staying the night when the drifts grew too high. Amara's bread and Caleb's stories around the fire filled the room with a comfort no storm could smother. One Sunday, as they drove the wagon into town for supplies, Amara noticed how folks greeted them now. Hats tipped, smiles offered. Even those who had once whispered behind their backs now waved without hesitation. She squeezed Caleb's arm, whispering, "Do you see? This place is learning what we already knew, that a home is built by love, not by rules." Caleb nodded, the rare curve of his smile answering hers. That night, as stars pierced the wide Wyoming sky, Caleb lay awake, listening to Amara's breathing beside him. He thought of the years he had spent shackled to silence, chained to memories. And then he thought of now, the warmth of her hand across his chest, the steadiness she brought to his restless soul. The past had not been erased, but it no longer ruled him. The cabin on the hill stood as it always had, weathered against the wind. Yet for the first time, it was alive. Its beams and rafters echoed with laughter, with song, with the quiet strength of two hearts that had chosen each other. Caleb closed his eyes, certain of one thing. He was home, truly home, at last. And so their story ended not with gunfire or storm, but with the quiet of an evening porch, a cabin where two once broken hearts had found each other. From loss, they learned to love again. From loneliness, they built a family. A true home is not in stone or land, but in the hand waiting to hold yours when the nights turn cold. Looking back, we see that love never comes too late. It may arrive after long winters, through doors we thought forever closed. And when we dare to open our hearts, the past is no chain, but soil from which the present grows. If this story has touched you, we invite you to share your own cherished memory or lesson of love in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue bringing you more Wild West love stories, because sometimes hearing just one story can make the heart feel young again.